Hey everyone, so on this week's episode of Make It with Calvin, I'm going to be talking about my role in all of this besides brainstorming with Jimmy, which was designing and manufacturing the parts for his travel trailer tube mount, so let's dive into it. And first of all, if you're somebody who doesn't like poop tube related jokes, go find another video because I'm going to try and keep them to a minimum, but there will be a few jokes in here, so you had fair warning. So obviously once Jimmy and I had gotten done discussing where in the world this thing was going to get mounted, originally we were talking about putting it on top of the square bumper. Then we kind of figured out the main reason why is we were worried about clearance at the bottom. Obviously the concern is if you're on a steep hill, the back end will drag down. But after seeing that the tube was actually going to be recessed higher, actually closer to the frame than anticipated compared to the leveling jacks, we figured, you know what, it's probably a good idea. Now the next thing was what material to use. Jimmy at first was thinking something like PETG, which probably would work, but the problem with it is any stiff material is going to also be brittle, which means if it gets hit, there's a high likelihood it could crack, and that could lead to a bunch of problems. So I eventually talked him into using TPU, and the main thought behind this is if this thing gets struck, it's at least going to have some ability to rebound. We were going to use multiple perimeters and a large nozzle anyways, but that was my thought process. And I also promised Jimmy if the tube mount broke and he lost his tube, I'd go to Walmart and buy him a replacement one. That was my guarantee. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened yet. So I don't think I owe him a new tube as of the time of filming. The thing's already survived being in very hot conditions. So that was great, but I digress. So when it came to the original design of this, all of this fancy pocketing on the sides, obviously here's where the bumper mounts and here's where the tube mounts. The original plan was this was just going to come straight down, and this was literally just going to be like a 90-degree transition right into that. So let me just extend the arcs here to show you what I mean by that. So this was supposed to be the original plan, and I'm kind of extending the arcs more, but this side on the left was going to come straight down and then mate into that arc there, which would have worked. Definitely would have worked, and I probably would not have put the pocket there. But the more I thought about it, the more I said, you know what? One of the interesting aspects about FDM 3D printing is sometimes when you add pockets to an item, not only does it make it take longer and take more material, because now you have a perimeter instead of infill, depending upon the material, and this does not apply to every application, you can actually make something stiffer because now you have extra perimeters there. So that was my thought process on this was, well, let me just put a brace here on the outside, so that way if the thing gets bumped, it's going to have a little more rigidity, but it also has some areas where it has a little bit of give in the event of an impact. And then also we have the fact that we're using a 0.8 nozzle with 4 perimeters. That's a thick wall. So obviously you're going to have that providing some stiffness as well. And I also just decided to put the pockets in there. If anything, if it didn't even offer any stiffness and or flexibility, it just looks cool. I figured, you know what, if we're building this thing and the prints are going to take upwards of, I think, 12 to 18 hours a piece, they took a while, I want this thing to look pretty professional. So if anybody comes on up and goes, what the heck is this thing? It doesn't look like 2 hacks put it together in 5 minutes. It actually looks like something you'd find online. So obviously we have the tube mount down there and we have the upper part there. And that was pretty much it. Pretty much once this got done, we just grabbed some random TPU on the shelf, printed up a quick prototype, popped it on there. And then we have that iconic photo of Calvin, who's, as of the time of filming, probably about 135 pounds. I'm literally standing on the PVC pipe. I'm just bracing myself against the travel trailer. That's all my weight, plus probably about a pound for the salad from Trader Joe's that I had gotten for dinner. So about 136 pounds standing on one of these mounts, and the thing didn't even care. I don't think it barely even flexed at all. So obviously, you get the idea. This thing is pretty darn stiff. So once we got that taken care of, the next step was the end cap. And this is where I got a little bit fancier. But obviously, we have the doo-doo Snake tube hiding inside the machine. I mean, the tube. We need the thing to be able to drain and vent. Obviously, it's going to get pretty stinky inside there otherwise. And yeah, just don't want to make it nasty. So to pull this off, this was actually done while the main part was running. This was secondary. This was pretty simple. I just took the same dimensions for the outer diameter of the pipe, and then I just offset a couple of concentric rings and then just arrayed around the spokes. It almost looks a little bit like the targets maybe on like a World War II battleship or something like that. And then just to make it look a little nicer on the outside, because aesthetics is a thing, I just made this circle here tangent to this circle and then just pulled it in 16/7 inch, arrayed it around, and then came along and put some nice little fillets on the edge there. And quite honestly, oh, and then I also put, I forgot to mention, a nice little chamfer on the inside there to make inserting and removing a little bit easier. But as you can see, there's a reason why Jimmy said Calvin literally knocked the design out in under 10 minutes. This is the beauty of using something like Fusion. If you're skilled at it, you can knock things out really, really quick. I'm not saying you couldn't do this in Tinkercad, but even Jimmy had to admit, and he is a die-hard Tinkercad user, Fusion definitely kicked butt. Now, let's jump on over to Simplify 3D to talk about the slicing that went into this. No, we're not building train track today. Obviously, you can use whatever slicer you want. The one thing we will say is, as this sits now, this was at the limits of our Artillery 3D Sidewinder X1. So what I did is I just came along and I offset it, I believe it was 60 degrees. Yeah, I offset it 60 degrees, which gave it enough room to efficiently sit on the print table. Now, like I said, his printer had, and I'm going to change the settings back for this video, the 0.8 nozzle. And the Duramenic 3D filament that we were using is quite soft. And this is no diss to the printer. I think a lot of printers have had a tough time with it. Initially, I was trying to run this thing pretty quick at 60 millimeters a second with retractions, and that just was not working. We'd get partway through the print to some extent, and then something would fail, and we'd have to start over. It was getting really frustrating. So what I ended up doing was, you know what? I have it set up so it's not going to cross any open areas. If there's a little bit of stringing, no big deal, we can clean that off. So I just came along and I killed all the retraction settings because I figured that might have been an issue. And because we were running a big nozzle, I also upped the layer height, I believe, to 0.6. And then I dropped it back down to 0.4, strictly because I didn't want the extruder having to work any harder than it needed to. And I did it with 4 perimeters. So that's how this thing got super stiff, and you'll see that in a minute. I also did it with 20% infill, which I knew there wasn't going to be a ton of infill space, but it didn't hurt. And then lastly, what I did is I just dropped the speed to a consistent 30 millimeters a second. And I didn't do any slowdowns for the perimeters or anything like that. The temperature stayed pretty high on the nozzle at 230, and then cooling went all the way up. The main thing was running this slower and a little bit hotter really helped. So let's see what this says. Yeah, that's about right. It took closer, I think, to 15 or 16 hours to pull this off, but I'd much rather have it take a couple of extra hours and completely finish than not. So if we pull this down a little bit, you can see what I'm talking about by we have the thick 4 perimeter walls, and we had some infill to provide some stiffness, but really it was the walls that gave us what we wanted. And then you can see here as well, we have all those perimeters bracing that up as well. And then we have the perimeters down there. So yeah, in short, this thing is stiff. Now, thankfully, we were able to use some soapy water to fit everything on there, but this thing definitely took a fair bit of filament. It took 520, I think probably closer to 550 grams of filament to pull off each one of these. So obviously we need to use two independent 1 kilo spools, and end caps really didn't take that much material at all. But yeah, that is how I pulled off my portion of this. And then obviously in the videos you saw, hopefully, and if you didn't, go check it out, Jimmy's video where we go and install it. And install really didn't take all that long. A little bit of soapy water, a little bit of elbow grease, got the tube on there. It's still holding on. Jimmy obviously decided to just give it a quick coat of spray paint on the inside, which I think wasn't a bad idea. It makes the tube darker, so it's like you're less likely to see the poop tube inside. All that good stuff. So, hope you guys found this interesting. And if there is enough interest in these parts, we will look into offering them some way, somehow. We haven't discussed that yet, but if you're interested, please let us know and we'll figure something out. And we'll see you here next time on Make It With Calvin, and also Jimmy Shaw's Tidbits for whatever new crazy travel trailer collab he has in mind. See you guys later.